Good evening to all. In today's webinar, we'll discuss about the planning and scheduling in construction with Primavera P6, the project management terminologies we use in the construction industry, understanding of the processes of planning, monitoring, and control, scheduling fundamentals, industrial application and usefulness of Primavera P6, and also we'll get to know about the current trends and industry scenario. So moving on to the topics for discussion on this webinar, we will discuss about the fundamentals of construction project management, the challenges in construction management, planning, monitoring, and controlling process. We'll learn about Primavera P6. We'll do a case study with Primavera P6, how to apply it on the projects in real life. And we'll look at the state of the art, the current industry trends, and the career opportunities for those who are willing to get into this field of construction management and civil. So starting with the basic fundamentals of project management, why we are starting with this is to get a basic understanding of what we are going to discuss for the next 40-45 minutes in this webinar. So we'll first see what is a project. We often use this term very often for construction projects and also for other any other industry as well. Maybe it's software or mechanical or engineer electrical. We use this word project very often. So what is a project? A project is a temporary endeavor undertaken to achieve a defined and unique goal. Basically, a project is a temporary endeavor because it has a defined start and a defined finish. It does not go on for long forever. It will have a defined duration. Any project I take up in civil, if I take a building or a railway or a highway project, I need to finish it in maybe 2, 3, or 4 years. That will be defined. It's not open-ended. Projects also have a clearly defined outcomes because they have a defined and unique goal. One must have a goal for which one undertakes a project. One has to put in that effort and resources. So it is very evident that the goal must be clear for why we are starting a project in the first place and what we need to achieve. So if we start a project in like a road project, we need to know how much of a traffic problem it is going to solve. If we start a residential project, we have to know how many dwelling units there will be and what facilities it will provide for those who stay there. So it has to be very clear. And also a project also comes with risk and uncertainties there. Project have risk and uncertainties for sure. Every project has some constraints, risk and uncertainties attached to it. So we need to identify them and we also need to take actions against them to have an effective project working in place. Then is the construction project life cycle. Very important discussion. We need to understand how the project works actually. The first phase in this cycle is initiation. So if we have a project in mind, we want to start a new project, we have to first be sure where to begin. We do a feasibility analysis, we evaluate, we have to examine whether the proposed project is in alignment with the objectives. Is it worth undertaking? We have to do all those analysis and then we have to take a call on that. Normally, it's not one single person working on it. It is a group of people working on it and taking the decision whether to go ahead with the project or not. Second comes planning, a very important phase in terms of project management and how the project roadmap is going to be. Here we decide the overall developmental approach about how we are going to start the project, what will be our requirements to do the project. We'll study more about the scope of the project and what going to be the budget and the cost estimation to complete that project. So we are going to prepare a roadmap for how we are going to go ahead to complete this project in time. So that is the planning stage. Then comes the execution. This is the stage where the most part of the effort and cost is involved. Also involves the largest amount of risks. So this is when we put all our plans that we have made into place so that we can complete the project successfully. Fourth is the monitoring and controlling. It is actually a method where we actually tend to inspect all the various aspects of the life cycle, like planning, execution, and also the closing stage. Here we find out whether the project is heading in the right direction. We generate those daily KPIs or the monthly reports and also track the cost and schedule to understand whether the project is in line with what has been planned for it to perform. So basically, it is how we measure the health of the project and also suggest improvements in which we can get the project back in track if it is behind schedule or suffering from cost overruns. This is the last part of this life cycle where we complete the project when we have filled up all the requirements of the client or the employer, and we are handing over this project. This is the most important phase for any company who is undertaking this project, because we tend to get the experience out of the entire project life cycle to uh, like we then compile them into a lessons learned register, which helps us in the future projects and also reduces the risk of the future projects, because we know, having done this one complete project, we know what risks and what uh, problems one can face. So closing stages of this project is an important part of the life cycle, because we get the lessons learned from this stage. Now getting into a few important terminologies which we are going to use a number of times later on in this webinar. So we'll get a bit of understanding of these terminologies early on. A critical path method, it is the analysis of the critical and non-critical activities of the project. So basically, we have to see which are the activities that are falling in the critical path while we schedule for any project there. So to achieve this, we need to construct a network diagram from where we need to find the longest path, which will be the shortest duration in which the project is completed, and any activity falling on that longest path will be termed as a critical activity. Those are the most important activities that we need to track and monitor while we schedule or monitor a project. Secondly is baseline. Baseline is a reference to measure the project performance. It is something that will be mutually agreed between the employer and the contractor as well. We prepare the schedule baseline, we prepare the cost baseline. So whenever we are required to monitor and control a current status of a project, we always do that with reference to that baseline. So we can have multiple baselines at different stages, but that will be the reference. So whenever we monitor based on one particular baseline. So it is also very important. Then comes the work breakdown structure. It is a hierarchical breakdown of the project deliverables. It gives us the scope. Whenever we have the scope of the project, we break it down into various parts and sub-elements to understand what is the actual scope and what are the sub-elements in that scope. Okay, so that will give us the work breakdown structure. Like if we have finishing activity in a particular residential project, we'll break it down further into the fixtures or flooring or painting. So we break it down based on the scope that we have to perform. So WBS or work breakdown structure is also another important terminology. Then is float and slack. So float and slack is basically the duration of delay without affecting the completion. Yes, for any activity, the float and slack will refer to the duration by which it can be delayed without affecting the overall completion. So this is basically interlinked with the critical path. So while scheduling and planning, we need to check out which activities have the lowest float and slack. Any critical activity will have zero float or zero slack. That means they cannot be delayed in order to ensure that the project finishes on time. Any delay on that activity will have an impact on the overall completion of the project. And the last one is Gantt chart. We are going to look into the Gantt chart in detail later on in this webinar. It is basically the representation of the schedule and activity relationships in a bar chart form, which is plotted against every activity on a particular timeline. Also, along with that, with the relationships between each activity will also be given. So we'll see how we can generate a Gantt chart through the scheduling software like Primavera, and go into the detail of all this later on in the case study. Now coming to the challenges of project management. Now, in India, we are facing a lot of challenge regarding the application of project management there. But why we require it in the first place? Why we require such a standard and robust planning and controlling system in the first place? So as you can see from this chart, in the energy and infrastructure sector, this is a report by the PMI and FICCI. Mm, In the atomic energy industry, you see 92% of the projects are running behind schedule. They're facing time overruns. In the petrochemicals, almost all the 100% of the projects are running behind the schedule there. So that is a matter of concern from the point of view of planning and construction project management, because somehow, somewhere there is some uh, gap which needs to be filled in order to reduce these numbers. We go into the infrastructure sector, we see in the railways, you see 83% of the projects with cost overruns and 98% of the projects with time overrun. Uh, Almost all projects in road and shipping, port, steel are facing time overruns there. So this is a number that really is of concern and needs to be checked. And on the right side of it, you can also see another graph there where you can see that there are various factors that are mentioned. They're like risk, complexity, inability to estimate and monitor, ineffectiveness, utilization of best practices and benchmark, difficulty to involve multiple stakeholders, and inability to synchronize project plan and execution. Now, if you look closely among all these factors are somewhere related to planning and control. So, so somewhere that project management system needs to be standardized by organizations at all levels to ensure that projects finish on time and do not have much schedule overruns or cost overruns. And inaccurate assessment of project risk has been given as the most important factor, which needs to be done at a very early stage. So the quicker we assess those risks during planning, and the quicker we are able to take action, and lesser the chances that the project is going to suffer. Now, understanding the processes of planning, monitoring, and control, very important. This is the core of the project management system in construction. Now, planning. So while we are starting with the idea of doing a project. Planning is basically the process of laying down the processes to complete the project within stipulated timeline. So basically, working as project management consultants or planning engineers, managers, planners, schedulers, whenever we start to plan for any project, we need to understand a few parameters. We need to set these parameters right. Without that, we cannot have a effective planning in place. So these parameters are what we need to do. That is, we need to understand the scope of the project, what needs to be done actually. Then we have to see then when to finish. So that is, we have to assess the duration, the contractual duration, how long we have, what is the time limit to finish that job. We know that any project, it has a particular start and a finish date. It's not an open-ended project. So we need to know the duration, and we need to assess the duration in which we can finish the work. We will have to target a duration by which we can complete the project in time. Thirdly, will be the parameter which will ask like who will perform the task. Now we need to know what are the resources that will be required, whether we have that or not, or we need to procure them for outside. If we are doing a very specialized job, maybe a finishing work or any other architectural work, we may require some specialized labors from outside state or maybe outside of country, wherever we require. So we need to assess those, what are the manpower required, how many, how much of manpower is required. Then what will be used to perform the task? Like what are the equipments we'll be requiring? Not all projects are of the same type. Projects are complex. They have a lot of complexities. The time cycle needs to be assessed. So we also need to understand the equipments. If we have a large excavation in place, we're doing a large, like a guard pond kind of a excavation or a huge water tank, then we may require long boom excavators for that. If we're doing a very high scale or a high rise project, we require specialized shuttering for that. So we need to understand what equipments are required for this. And what is the budget? So we also need to assess at this point what is going to be the budget, what is going to be the cost. We need to estimate that cost, because based on that, we need to find out how we are going to create the spending plan or the spending summary. There we have to manage, we have to create a cash flow diagram for that. So we need to know how much we need to spend, how much we are required to spend without going into this cash or the cost overrun situation. For all these things, now there is a saying that you cannot plan for something that you cannot measure. So we need to measure. We need to have a well-suited estimation process in place to get an idea of all these parameters before we start planning for any particular project. Secondly, the monitoring part. So monitoring is an inspection that is carried out to update the status of the project. So basically, it is done to check the direction of the project, whether the project is going into the right direction or not. So whatever we have planned, so all these monitoring will be done based on the baseline, so what we have assessed, what we have planned beforehand. So we have to check with the actual start and the finish dates, that of the planned start and the finish date to an activity which was supposed to start on the first day. Has it started or has it gone beyond? Has it crossed that date and started on the fifth day? So that monitoring is an inspection that we require to do on a very timely basis and generate reports to ensure that we keep a track on the project, how it is working, how it's functioning. Then also the actual cost for resources consumed. We also have a budget in place. So we need to check whether we are going above that budget or we are within the budget limits. So that is very important. We need to keep a periodic check on that. Plan versus actual comparison. So that will be generated through S curve. You can see an example on the right hand side where there is a curve showing the cumulative cost there. So you see the budgeted curve above and the actual cost curve below it. So that shows that yes, the project is still under within that budget for that particular status date. So that is also an important parameter we need to keep in check there to understand if we are running into a cost overrun or not. And updating any variance in cost and schedule is whatever is the exact actual dates we need to update or the actual cost we need to update to it. And then we have to see what are the impacts of that and what is the current status of the project. So that is where the use of the softwares come in there, like Primavera MSP, which helps us to monitor and plan these projects and helps us to control it further better and have a standardized practice in place. Controlling. Controlling is introducing measures and action to manage the cost and schedule of the project. Like it is a way which we have to like suggest the actions in which we can keep the project back in track. The project is not in the right track, it is not in the right direction. So it is also done on the basis of the baseline schedule. Baseline provides a solid point of reference as it tends to change over time. What it does is it helps to compare the original schedule to the current one and identify significant changes and also helps us to develop any contingency plans that we need to keep the project in place. So the outputs of controlling will be an enhanced operation cost control. So we can reduce the cost if we are running into a cost overrun. How can we do that? We can reduce the wastage from these construction processes. We can reduce the overheads. We can reduce fuel consumption. So we can do a lot of things to reduce the overall costs there. We can reduce the delay and schedule overruns. Controlling also helps us to reduce that delay by rescheduling the activities in a way to ensure that task finishes in time. It also helps in risk identification and mitigation measures. We tend to identify the risks beforehand and take measures. We can maybe transfer or mitigate or can also avoid those risks depending upon the type of risk we are facing. So very important, very vital, as we have seen earlier. It's a major challenge. So in the right side, you have seen like this the iron triangle, the scope, time, and cost. The quality has to be maintained at all times. So if somehow any one of the factors is disrupted, so it will disrupt the entire. The other two will also get affected there. So it is very important that we keep we whatever we do is in the scope and also we maintain the time frame and the cost while maintaining the quality at the same time. Very important thing. And also through controlling, we can generate the KPIs, the EVM and value management, and those KPIs gives an indication of how the project status currently is, how the project is working, and how can we, what better can be done to keep it in track or bring it back in the right direction.